Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Stanford Institute of Philanthropy Perfecting the Pitch webinar, or we actually like to call it today the New Pitches for Fundraising. So my name is Emmanuel Takahashi, and I am the Program Director here at the Stanford Institute of Philanthropy. And before we get started, I'd like to share a couple of things with you. First, I'd like to talk about who we are at the Stanford Institute of Philanthropy. So we exist to serve fundraisers and nonprofit leaders and educate them around fundraising. And fundraising is not just, asking for money. We really look at it as building capacity, building relationships, and really, have an increased impact on our communities and society. Everything we do here is around what we call the COS Selling Cycle. And yes, I talk about selling, but like I said, we're talking about selling around relationships. And the cycle has 3 phases and 8 steps. So it goes from finding where your donors are, to approaching them, to finding out what are their hot buttons, and all the way obviously to asking them for donations, and also stewardship, which is a very important part of this whole cycle. And it is a cycle, right? So it never ends. It goes around and around, whether it's with, current donor, prospective donors. We really are teaching in our workshops and seminars and classes that, it's a never-ending process based around building that relationship and cultivating that relationship. So today, we are going to focus on step 5. Step 5 here is titled Presentation and Storytelling. We're not talking about, what we're doing today, basically a presentation with slides. We're not only talking about that, we're talking about how you tell the story of your organization, how you tell the story of your cause, and how you present, that opportunity to donors and prospects. We're going to talk a lot about obviously being able to do that face-to-face, but we're going to talk about other modalities as well. The Stanford Institute of Philanthropy is actually a nationwide, network. We have the Stanford Institute of Philanthropy here at National University, where everything started with our benefactor, Denny Stanford. And we expanded, all around the country, as you can see on this map, by partnering with universities and organizations around the country. So, for example, we have John F. Kennedy University in Northern California. We have City University in Seattle, Maricopa Community Colleges in Arizona, Augustana University in South Dakota, Bellevue University in Nebraska, Xavier University of Louisiana, and Long Island University in New York, and also the National Leadership Institute in Florida. So we're very excited to see all of you today from all across America joining us, at this webinar. Also, if you are tweeting, Facebooking, Snapchatting, Instagramming, whatever it is you do on social media, and you hear some great piece of information that you want to share with your network, we absolutely encourage you to do so. And also, we would kindly ask that if you do so, to use the hashtag SIPwebinar. We also like to have our webinars be interactive and engaging, so at any time, please feel free to ask any questions and using the Q&A section. And if you don't want to, share your name, please check the box anonymously, and we'll still see your question, but we will know it's you. A couple final things that I wanted to share with you about what we do and who we are. We're very proud here at the Stanford Institute of Philanthropy to have empowered more than 35,000 nonprofit leaders in the past 3 years only. And, you can see on the slide the very high praise that we get from our participants. One of them that we're, very proud of is the 99% of our participants feel engaged and energized by instructors, which is why, we're so different, and how, we're able to, educate so many nonprofit leaders, and they come back and really feel like they're leaving the sessions with great content, not only great content, but also, feeling more confident, feeling more motivated to do the great work. So talking about instructors, myself, you're hearing me, Emmanuel Takahashi. I am joined today by my great friend and colleague, Krista Berry Ortega, who is the Vice President of the Welty Group. I have been, I have the honor and pleasure to work with Krista for the past 3 years, almost since the inception of the Institute. She's been an instructor for us, for the Fundraising Academy, for our workshops, and now today with our webinar. And she has a wealth of experience in the nonprofit world, working as a consultant and also being very involved in her own community of City Heights in San Diego. So, Krista, welcome, and let's get it started.
Yes, thank you for having me, Emmanuel. I'm excited to be here and to have this conversation with you guys across the country today. So let's start by just hearing from you. What do you want to learn today? Why did you log in? And you can use the chat feature. Just give us some feedback on what you're looking to learn today so that we can hopefully answer all those questions.
Yes, so go ahead, type away in the chat. What questions are burning that you want to learn about pitching? We're going to give you a couple minutes. So we see Frank is wanting to have to know more about being better storyteller, and also Betsy, how to create a persuading story to donors. I like that word, persuading. Debbie also wants to know key ways to attract potential donors. How to best engage. Nancy wants to know how to best engage potential donors. Susan would like also know how to get sponsors and funders as a new one-year-old nonprofit, and how to stand out. Oh, I like this one. How to stand out from other nonprofits. We also have how to make a pitch fresh, since so many are out there, especially at this year in time. That's a very good point. Carolyn, this is the fundraising, kind of finish line right now. So that's a really good point. And how do you turn a yes or a no to a no? And how do you describe the impact of an advocacy organization? Very good. And also Jasmine would like to learn key ways to attract local donors in a small town. Oh, I like this one too. And we also have a question on how to minimize the length of what you're doing and who you are to an elevator pitch. Wow, those are all great, objectives and goals of what you want to learn today. Great questions. We're going to address many, actually, of them already today. And then if we're not addressing it, we'll go back to it. And again, feel free to continue, to ask your questions throughout the webinar.
Excellent. Thank you, guys, for that. So just an overview on today's initial topics that we have prepared for you. We're going to talk a little bit about the importance of face-to-face meetings, and ultimately, that's really the goal, right? To get that face-to-face meeting with any donor. We're going to talk a little bit about the planning and kind of major points that you want in your presentation, and we're going to continue to reiterate to not be too scripted. This is really about practicing and being comfortable with improv and developing relationships. Really being in the moment and working on your listening techniques, which is just as important as your actual presentation and speaking. Learning how to manage the meeting, not only using improv, but really developing that relationship with the donor so it's a long-term relationship. And we're going to talk about some other kind of fun modalities that you can bring to your fundraising program as well. So we really like this image because it talks about this relationship that donors have with the work that you do and that you have with this head and heart, right? That ultimately we know that we need to communicate the numbers and the facts and the financials and that kind of, more head-focused information about our organization. But a lot of times the heart is what really drives our donors to initially get involved and to continue to give. There's this balance. We talk about storytelling a lot in the sector, but there's this balance of not just storytelling when you're in front of a donor, but it's telling the story. And it's just a little bit of a shift from how we've continually talked about it. Storytelling really works in an annual appeal or on your website or in some written communications, maybe your year-end letter that goes out to your donors for your campaign. But what's important about this pitch or this conversation with donors is bringing the head and heart into how you tell the story that's going to most match what their interests are. A lot of times I see folks being so prepared going into talking to donors with their quote unquote pitch that they miss the opportunities to really hear what that donor's interests are and really understand, based on their personality, what are the facts that you think that they want to know, and what are the stories that are best to tell to those donors. And obviously, when we have this kind of head and heart balance and we're connecting with our donors, we get to better understand their social styles and their behaviors. And that helps us continue the relationship, kind of answering some of your questions on how you're going to attract donors. Well, it's a very individual basis. It's not a broad strategy. It's very individualized based on your mission and your work and what their interests are. Before we get this one-on-one meeting, which is ideally what we're looking for, this face-to-face meeting, we want to talk a little bit about what these meeting goals look like. You know, we want to know why we're there, right? There's a lot of reasons why we might be there, and it's not usually an ask right away. A lot of you asked more questions around wanting to know prospecting. Well, that's an important stage in where you might be with a donor, and that's not necessarily where you want to have an ask right away. You want discovery meetings. You want to get them more engaged in the organization. There's stewardship opportunities, or if they just gave you a small donation, there's some follow-up opportunity to thank them and give some appreciation before you ask them again. Also, who should be there? This is an important conversation. It doesn't always have to be you, the development director, the fundraising officer, or even the CEO. We see a lot of success when volunteers or board members or other donors are a part of these one-on-one or face-to-face donor meetings. So it's a really important conversation to have internally. Who should be at this meeting and who can make that introduction? And then ultimately, what do you want to accomplish by the end? Not every time that you have a meeting with a donor, you're going to ask them for money. So what is the goal? I recently have been working with a nonprofit here as our client, and we're helping them launch a campaign. And so a lot of the meetings that they're having with their major donors right now are getting the donors involved in the campaign committees and volunteer opportunities. The ask at the campaign will come later. So really, what do you plan to accomplish by the end of the meeting? And we can't say it enough. Listen, listen, listen. If you find yourself talking a little longer than you think it might be necessary, or you're observing visual cues that they might be potentially not as engaged, stop talking and listen. Find a way to ask some questions and to really listen to your donor. They should be talking the most in these meetings, and often we go into it thinking that we need to be presenting and talking the most and having a script. And so we really want to get you guys out of that habit, because we know the best successful meetings and ultimately the most engaged donors are the ones that are talking about your work and spreading that word beyond your meeting out in the community. And it's really critical to plan your call to action, right? Your CTA for the type of meeting you're having. Like, is your call to action to get them more engaged in a committee? Or is it to give them a tour next time they're in the area? There's a lot of different calls to action. As long as you have that, not even by the end of the meeting, it might be something that comes up in the beginning of the meeting, but that you can go back to at the end of the meeting and make sure that they're really involved in that. And I like to say, it's not just the ask for asking for the money, it's the kind of mantra that you can have in the meetings: ask questions. And so some of the preparation for these meetings might be the questions that you need to ask your donor so that you can get to know them better. You want to know what other organizations they might be donating to and why they might decide to donate at that level, especially your major donors that you want to cultivate on a larger level, that you've already done that research and know they're giving more to someone else. So on the persuasive side, it's really getting to know them well so that you can find the right place for them to continue to be involved in your organization. Some other ways that you can plan your meeting to go very successfully is using this planning sheet. This is a pretty detailed list, but I'm sure there's more information that you might have in your organization that you might even want to add or tailor to your organization to make sure that you're planning. I think this is almost more critical these days because it's not just one person going to a meeting with a donor. You're going to have a team usually. So it's you and your CEO, or you and a volunteer, or you and another donor. So it's important that as part of your meeting prep, you're thinking through what else you need for planning. Ideally, you're all using your good CRMs, either Donor Perfect or a lot are using Salesforce these days to track your donor information. But whatever way you're using to track donor information, this is a lot of important stuff that you need to have gathered in advance and regularly gathering on donors. Obviously, name and contact information, information on who's going to be there and the goals, which we talked about. Giving capacity. If you've known what they've given in the past, that's important information to pull from your CRM before going into the meeting so that everyone sees the giving capacity over the years. How long have they been giving? What have they been giving? What's their max gift? When was that they gave their max gift? And if you don't have this information because they're not a current donor, then this is where you do want to spend as much time as possible or have someone on your team do some prospect research. Some of you might have access to search engines that you have used before, and some can just use Google. Google's a pretty great tool that we never really had years ago. Do a search and see where else they've given to. And a lot of times there's press releases out there for major donors. There's files that have been, public records at other organizations in terms of what people have given. You can always ask volunteers what they know, that maybe not the dollar amount, but who else they give to, so you can kind of get a sense of not just do they have money, but are they philanthropic? What's their history and their experience in the community? A lot of times I talk to clients that, oh, well, they're rich. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're philanthropic, so you really want to know their giving history. Common interests and any kind of relationships that they're going to have in the community are critical because you might want to bring those into the meeting or utilize those in getting to know them. Obviously, philosophies and values and other materials that you need to take along with you. It's important to have a good leave behind, but I'd recommend not leaving too much behind because that can be a little overwhelming depending on what your meeting goal is. It's good to talk through anticipated objections. Some folks get a little feathers ruffled when you hear that what that might be from especially some other volunteers or donors, but it's good to kind of know that maybe there's been, I don't know, they haven't been stewarded in the same way that they would like to at your organization, and you really want to address that and say, hey, we've had some leadership transition here, and we're sorry that we haven't been able to communicate with you as regularly, but we really want to get you re-engaged, and we want to know what that's going to look like today, right? Handle those objections or concerns that you think might be out there immediately. And then ultimately the results of the meeting and the call to action, right? We've talked about that. We really want to know what it is that we're going into in terms of goals, and then ultimately what we want to get out of it. Any personal interests, hobbies, children, all of these things are important things to not only know in advance, but if we know that there's a gap in what we know about it, maybe that's the purpose of the meeting, and part of the call to action is to get to know their family more, attend an event that they're really excited about so that you can get to know them better. So it's this call to action, and here are some examples. Like, what is the next step? They're looking for you to do this. And I think that that's sometimes a little bit of a hard thing to think about as a fundraiser, that yes, they're going to give you money, and yes, you're going to develop this relationship, but philanthropists and donors are getting more and more savvy today than ever. And they're giving to organizations that are stewarding them and that know their stuff, that are professional fundraisers, which is why you guys are all here today and involved in the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy already. They want you to be the professional that's moving the process forward. So really knowing what the goal is, they're going to appreciate that. Are you seeking national capital funds? Are you interested in having them get involved in a committee? Are you wanting them to come down to your space and see your work in action, to see your impact, get a tour on the books? So there's a lot of different calls to action, and they're diverse depending on the stage you're in: stewardship, engagement, prospecting, follow-up, discovery. All of the stages are going to have different calls to action, but you want to know what those expectations are going to be going in, and donors really want to know that, I promise you. They tell me all the time. They want you to really guide the process, but they really want you to listen to what their interests are.
So talking about pitch, so we talked a lot about how we prepare, right? How we even, prepare for when we know we're going to have a meeting with a prospect or a donor. But today, obviously, we're talking about pitch, and we're going to talk in a minute about going beyond the elevator pitch. I'm sure all of you have heard about the elevator pitch, but I'd like to share a little story of where that came from, and hopefully that will give a little bit of color around the elevator pitch. So I'm sure you guys have heard the name Otis, right? You see it in almost every building. It's pretty much the leader in that industry. But Otis was actually an American craftsman. And back in the fall of 1853, at that time, there were already elevators, but they were mostly for cargo. They were mostly for things to be carried up and down. And it was deemed unsafe for people, to ride those elevators. They were not very controllable. They could just drop, and not know how to stop. But Otis, who was a craftsman, had figured out a way to control that elevator, to make sure we can say it's going to stop there, and to slow down, and to control the speed. And he was just so excited about this, that, this invention would be a great transformation into buildings. However, the public was very fearful, because obviously if the elevator doesn't work and it falls, people could die. So Otis had a great idea to make sure that people, here is new invention, and buy into it, whether it was looking for investors or just, the public support. So he invited a bunch of people and gathered them around his prototype of this new elevator. And he himself got on the elevator, pressed a button, and made it come down. And the people were gasping, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to him? And then the elevator just stopped where it was supposed to. And Otis shouted to the crowd, all safe, all safe. And that was his pitch. He didn't need to say anything else, anything more. People were engaged, people were convinced, and obviously we all know where the story ends, with all those Otis elevators all across the country and the world, actually, that the company is really big today. So that's the elevator pitch. And I know today we also talk about the elevator pitch as, having barely a minute or even 30 seconds, with someone in an elevator that you're riding with before, they get off on their floor, or, you get off on your floor. And that gives you a very short amount of time, to get people's attention, to get them engaged, and to get them intrigued. Because in the end, a pitch is not about telling them everything, in 30 seconds. It's about starting that conversation. It's about creating that relationship and really intriguing, your prospect or donor to what else is out there, that they could do with your organization. Right. So, today we'll talk about beyond the elevator pitch, and that great resource that we want to share with you, Ditch the Pitch.
Ditch the Pitch. Thank you, Emmanuel. It's available online, this full report that you can download by Steve Yastro. But we wanted to just cover it because if you have that minute, kind of like retooling our brain to say, instead of practicing that pitch, that speech, what would happen if instead, not storytelling, but I told a story about why I love working at the organization, a short one, and then say, have you heard of us before? Or even open it up to a question to get them involved. And that's really the kind of point of number one, is think input before output, right? That it's a conversation with your donor, that everything you say and basically hear, because you need that opportunity to hear, is going to be informed by your donor. There's a lot we're doing in our organizations today, you guys. It's like we're killing it, right? The nonprofit sector is killing it, and from my perspective, we need the nonprofit sector in this country now more than ever. So we need to keep our organizations busy and complex, but the donor might not be interested in everything that we're doing. That's our job. We're interested in that. So that's thinking about the input, like what is it that they're interested in? Why do you think that they would be interested? Finding something about them, and now you can tell the story based on what their interests are that really gets them to connect. So it's really thinking about what that's going to be before you just, the output is the scripted pitch, right? The scripted presentation. I work at a 501c3, that's my pet peeve when people start talking about their organization like that. Like, yeah, we know, that was like a couple seconds of your time. What else can you talk about, right? And ultimately, every time that you're talking is a moment that you're not listening to your donor or your prospect. A lot of folks had questions around prospects. So in order to get them engaged, it's listening to them and seeing if A, they're the right fit for you, because you know your organization well. You don't want to be going down a road of trying to engage a prospect for 3 years that ultimately isn't in tune with your values and what your organization is all about. So every time that you're speaking and every moment that you're speaking in that kind of elevator pitch scenario, you're not getting to know them. And that's really the point of think input before output. Number 2 is size up the scene. Sometimes you arrive either at a donor's house, or maybe this is around a foundation that you're looking to engage and cultivate for a grant, and things just aren't exactly the way you planned it, right? Maybe something critical just happened on the news and they're working, nonstop to try to keep up with that. Maybe for some reason, I don't know, the dogs in your donor's house are barking and the scene isn't as quiet as you had expected. So it's really important to, this is the improv piece, be in the moment. You're prepared, trust yourself, and size up the scene. Really understand what it is that you're walking into in their situation. Maybe they just had a death in the family that you find out about in the middle of the meeting. We've had a lot of natural disasters around our country, and I think we talked about this, that I would go into meetings and no one would even check in and make sure that people's families were okay. Like, don't skip over the human part, right? This is about relationships with humans. Size up the scene. You'll learn so much. You'll observe so much about your donor and their character and the situation around them, and ultimately the reasons why they might want to give. Number 3 is create a series of yeses. This goes back, I originally studied theater in undergrad, which I do believe makes me a good fundraiser and hopefully instructor. But we'd have this game and we play, that professional improv actors play as well, and we set up a scenario, and the point of the game is to say yes and, to build upon what someone created for you in a scenario and say yes and. There's not a lot of no's and buts in improv and acting, and there really shouldn't be in donor relations. We want to create a series of yeses for you that you're not responding to them like, nope, we don't do that, or nope, I'm not interested in that, or nope, I don't know anything about that. But we also want to create situations where they're saying yes, because that's ultimately going to get them in the habit of saying yes for when that big ask comes about. Or whatever your call to action is. If your call to action is getting them involved in a campaign committee, you do want to set up that scenario as yeses. So really try to avoid the word no and but, and you can coach your entire fundraising team, your volunteers, and the rest of the folks in your organization around that as well. That we want it to be, for both parties, a series of yeses so that you can move the relationship forward. Otherwise, you get stuck in that space for a while. Number 4 is explore and heighten, and I think this should make pretty clear sense, right? The more we explore and understand what that donor's interests are, the more we can elevate our relationship with them to a higher level. It's really critical before you make an ask that they're engaged in your organization. Some of the best donors started as volunteers. And typically today, if we're talking about the wide variety of donors that we need, if we look at how corporations have changed the way they're giving, that's a perfect example of how we want to explore and heighten our relationship with them. They typically don't give, especially in San Diego, I don't know about your communities, but money right out the gate cold anymore. They want to be involved. They want an employee from their organization to be on a committee or on your board. They want to be more involved in your impact. Is there a way, with all the holidays coming up, that you have a program that already exists that these corporate or foundation or individuals can come out and experience your impact? So the more you explore what their interests are in that, the more you can really heighten that level of involvement. And typically that's where you see the big dollars coming in as well, because they're the ones that now can tell their friends, well, I did this over the holidays and it touched my heart, and this is a really important organization for me, and I want you to be involved as well. And they're bringing people to you. And that's really the critical piece of prospecting with donors, is they're bringing people to you. Focus the conversation on your donor. It sounds kind of simple, but we don't see this happening all the time. And this is the difference between you having great donations coming in and great relationships and sustainable philanthropic dollars and revenue, and not. Resist the temptation to continue to, talk about your organization like that. Really, it's so critical. And have that conversation with your donor. Focus the conversation on them. Okay, it's critical. How are they going to be involved? If they've already given, how have they made an impact? I just saw someone at National Philanthropy Day yesterday. We celebrated our National Philanthropy Day in San Diego yesterday. And she said, I got to focus on bringing in these new donors and I need some help. I'm like, well, my first question for you is, how have you thanked the ones that just gave? And she's like, oh my God, I didn't even think about that. I'm like, well, the person that gave you the last dollar is your best donor. So before, yes, please have a prospecting program, please. Bring people in, you need more. But if someone just gave you $100, or if someone just gave you $10,000, they should be in a process of being thanked, appreciated, more engaged, and ultimately that's where you're spending a lot of time. We forget to do that. If people just came to your event, how are you focusing this conversation with them around, thank you for coming to the event, thank you for bringing your friends? And then ultimately, number 6 is don't rush the story. Again, we are so busy and we're so knowledgeable, us nonprofit professionals, on the wide variety of what we do as an organization, that sometimes we overwhelm people. And that's why it's beyond the pitch. It's don't rush it. Feel them out. This is relationship development, right? You need to know where they are. If they kind of just learned about something from you, you probably don't want to layer on the 7 other programs that you have going on. Let them come and explore that one. See what their reaction is. It's really important that it's a kind of a typical sales factor, is that we're like bringing in the conversation at the pace that's right for the donor. So we're adjusting our pace based on what their pace is. You might hear, no, I don't want to get involved in that. That's okay. No worries. How would you like to be involved? More questions. Let the story emerge from your conversation, and really, really, really pace yourself. I think that's critical.
All right, so we learned how to ditch the pitch, but then next I wanted to introduce you to another resource. That's a book that I love so much, and I feel like it applies to really anybody because it's titled To Sell is Human. So if you're a human, you can sell. And this book was written by Daniel Pink, and in it, on chapter 6, it talks about the different pitches that are succeeding the elevator pitch. Mm-hmm. So, it incorporates a lot of what, we just talked about, really focusing on the donor, seeing who they are and how best, they will receive, your story and your pitch. So I'd like to share with you some of the pitches that Daniel Pink describes in his book. So the first pitch that he talks about is the one-word pitch. It's a pitch that distills your message into a single word. So really, today in 2017, going 2018, we all know how short people's attention span is, right? I mean, we're bombarded with information, with pitches. I think a lot of your comments at the beginning were talking about that, right? So how do you stand out, and how do you make sure that people know about, about you? So one of the things that Daniel Pink suggests is to use the one-word pitch. So for example, I'm going to ask you a couple questions. What technology company do you think of when you hear the word search? Also, what credit card company comes to mind when you hear the word priceless? And you guys can go ahead and type your answers, but I'm pretty sure it's, you're all coming up with the same thing. So when it comes to the word search, what technology company do you think of? Of course, everybody's typing Google, right? Google search, it's like, they're like, one word, right? Mm-hmm. And then what about the second one? What credit card company comes to mind when you hear the word priceless? MasterCard, exactly. So you all are typing MasterCard. Oh, somebody said Amex. But MasterCard is really the one that comes to mind because of their campaign that they had, talking about all the stories and that everything else is priceless. So, that's the word, one word, that's all it takes. And then, I wanted to share with you also, we have forward on the slide right there. And that's from the 2012 re-election campaign that President Barack Obama built a strategy around, that one word, forward, right? And that's something that we all remember. And I have a comment here. Advertise is something that people remember ads, but not who they're for. That's true. But with the one-word pitch, though, now you associate that one word with that company, right? So what word can you think of your organization that would describe it the best? For example, here, actually, at the Stanford Institute of Philanthropy, our word is fundraising. If we want people to think about us when they think fundraising, of course, fundraising education if you go further, but that's really our core competency. We don't do nonprofit management. We don't do, our best, programs are around fundraising. So the one-word pitch is very valuable.
Yeah, and I think ultimately what it does is it helps you distill down, and maybe it's not one word for every donor, but it helps you distill down what is a lot that can be overwhelming in a mission statement, for example. So you don't use it necessarily interchangeably with other pitches, but it's good to distill it down and have it be more simple.
Yeah, and just one word that is yours, right?
Yeah.
The second pitch that Danielle Pink mentions is the question pitch. It's a pitch that asks a question instead of making a statement. So going on with election campaigns, in 1980, Ronald Reagan was running for president, and the economy was not doing so well at the time. So he could have gone about, I'm going to be the one who's going to help you, help the country, rebuild and have a better economy. Your economic situation has deteriorated over the last 48 months, with the previous president, but I'm going to help you, right? And yeah, some people will be like, okay, maybe, we trust you, whatever. But instead, Reagan asked the question. He said, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And that's all he had to do. Because now all the American people, they were answering that question themselves. Instead of him telling them what he wanted them to think about, he asked the question to have them think about that statement for themselves. And that has so much power that, I really encourage all of you to have that question pitch. And, you can practice how to come up with that question pitch by asking yourself, let me see here, what arguments that, your organization has that are really strong, right? So, that example of Ronald Reagan is really good. But instead, think about, if you want to make a statement that your organization is the greatest at solving this or that problem, instead of saying it and making a statement, why don't you turn it around and ask a question, right? That your prospects and donors would be compelled to respond, themselves. So really, you're making people work a little bit harder, obviously, with that pitch, but it prompts them to come up with their own reasons for agreeing with your statement. And that's a really powerful way to pitch. A third one, this is actually my favorite pitch type that Danielle Pink talks about. And it's probably because, he's using an example that we can actually all relate to, with the gummy bears, Haribo. I'm actually from France, and the company Haribo is from Germany. but every country that Haribo operates at, their pitch is a rhyming pitch. So, of course, like it says the rhyming pitch rhymes. And so Haribo in English is kids and grown-ups love it so, the happy word of Haribo. In French, it's Haribo c'est beau la vie pour les grands et les petits. And in Spanish, it's Haribo dulces sabores para pequeños y mayores. So in every language, it rhymes, and in every language, it says the same thing, actually. And that is something that I remember the pitch for when I was little, and I will always remember it. And I'm sure a lot of you, here in America in English also know, what this pitch is. So it's very powerful. It's been proven scientifically that, rhyming is easier to remember. And therefore, if it's easy to remember, it has a greater impact when you pitch this way. Another example, I'm sure you all know, if you were alive in American at that time, about the O.J. Simpson trial. And if I start saying, what the closing statement of the defense lawyer was, if it doesn't fit, I'm sure you all can finish that sentence, right? If it doesn't fit, if you remember, then it was, you must acquit. That's right, Melissa. So, the rhyming, pitch can be a little intimidating, if you feel like you're not that creative or that, you're not sure where to start. But think about, what is your organization about? And, there are some, website. I can't think of the one that I wanted to give you today, but there are some websites that will help you, find rhyming words. And, you use it when you meet with your donors. You can use it on your website, and that's a very powerful pitch.
Yeah, and I think even in social media, today social media is a great way to continue our relationship with our donors or to get people more involved. And with the holidays coming up, year-end giving is, this is the time that people give the most coming up right now. So I think this is a fun way to use social media and other online, maybe even a subject line of an email to mix it up.
Which actually brings us to our next pitch, right? The subject line pitch. So every email subject line is a pitch. I think we get so many emails all day long from so many people. And yes, Melissa, rhyme zone, that's a good one. Sorry, going back to the rhyming pitch. But going to the subject line pitch, every email you send is an opportunity for you to pitch. And also knowing that your subject line is sometimes the only thing that people will read because it comes to their inbox. They might not even open the email. So this is an opportunity, to get people's attention and also an invitation to engage. So again, a pitch, we're reframing what a pitch is, right? It's not just having to tell your whole story and, get people to say yes right away, but really starting that conversation. And a subject line pitch is a great way to say that, to do that. So for example, a mushy subject line could be improve your golf swing. Well, if you get that email, you're probably not going to open it. Like, yeah, whatever. But if it's more specific, that it says 4 tips to improve your golf swing this afternoon, then you might be like, oh, I actually have a game this afternoon. Maybe I can use those 4 tips, and you will open it, right? So you want to tap into the principles of utility, curiosity, and specificity, if you really want to use the subject line pitch. But think about it, and next time you're sending an email, to your donors, especially, again, this is year-end giving. I'm sure you all have email campaigns lined up for, meet your goals this year. Think about what is the subject line that will really, get that attention and attract, people to open it and obviously get more engaged with you. And Seth says, even just getting them to read the subject header is a minor victory. Actually, I would say it's a major victory, right? Because we get so many emails that sometimes if I just see the sender, I'm like, whatever, I'll read it later, right? So, but getting to read the subject line, that could be your pitch here and there. So very important. So take some time, when you build your email campaigns so that it doesn't get lost in the shuffle. To think about your subject line as an actual pitch.
Right, and my little tip before I move on is don't forget this time of year to repetitively send those emails. When we're designing these online campaigns, yes, we want to be sure that we're not overwhelming people, but this time of year, they need it regularly. They need regular reminders. 1 email or 2 emails is not enough. I want to be reminded multiple times to make my donation before the end of the year, because the first 4 times I might forget to do it right away. So I would say don't feel like you need to really limit it. People are used to being bombarded, and I see it as a reminder. So send them.
Yeah, send them. With a great subject.
With a great subject pitch.
The next pitch we want to share with you today is the Twitter pitch. And that's a pitch in the form of a tweet. So I think it was, what college was it? TP College in Iowa. They actually had their MBA candidates, instead of writing a long essay, they had them write a 140-character Twitter pitch to say why they were the best candidates and why they should be, selected to enter the program. And that was a great exercise because they had to be concise and they had to be, straight to the point, but at the same time be engaging. So you can think of, how you can make an effective tweet by using only 140 characters. And that can be combined, right, with the rhyming pitch that we talked about earlier. But that's a really great way. I know some of you had questions. That's right, Amaris, it's actually 280 now. It's more than 140. But I would encourage you to try with 140 because, a lot of you have asked, how to minimize the length of what your pitch is, how to make it concise. Well, that's a great way to start, to think about, can I say everything I need to say and get people involved with the 140 characters, right? And then even try, to make it as short as possible, and then go back to the one word event. Can you make it one word, right? So talking about length, there are many ways that you can make your pitch really short. And then one last one, I know we're almost running out of time. One last one that I wanted to share with you is the Pixar pitch. And that's actually my second favorite, I'm gonna say, because as you all know, Pixar, kind of took over almost Disney with the way they would pitch their films. And the narrative structure of every Pixar film is the same, and you can use that as a pitch. So I'm going to give you an example, and I want to see if you can figure out what film this is pitching. It says, once upon a time, there was a widowed fish named Marlin who was extremely protective of his only son, Nemo. Every day, Marlin warned Nemo of the ocean's dangers and implored him not to swim far away. One day, in an act of defiance, Nemo ignores his father's warnings and swims into the open water. Because of that, he's captured by a diver and ends up as a pet in the fish tank of a dentist in Sydney. Because of that, Marlin sets off on a journey to recover Nemo, enlisting the help of other sea creatures along the way, until finally, Marlin and Nemo find each other, reunite, and learn that love depends on trust. So that's, obviously, you all figured it out, it's Finding Nemo. And that's the structure that Pixar uses all the time. And that's the structure you can use for a pitch. So that's more when you have some time, or even on your website, where you want to really tell that story. And the structure is, you start with once upon a time. And of course, if you don't want to go into too much, cartoon story, you can, start something else. But that's, you start with the beginning, right? And then you go every day. So something that happens every day, right? And if it's your organization, it could be that every day thousands of people are dying because they don't have access to clean water, right? And then one day, so something happens, right? Maybe you discovered a way to clean that water, right? For the people that are dying with not clean water. And then you say, because of that, less people, more people have access to clean water. And then because of that, less people are dying from not having access to clean water, until finally the whole world can drink clean water and be healthy. So it's very, especially for nonprofit organization, I think it's one of the very easy way and having an easy structure to tell your story in a way that is impactful, in a way that is attractive.
Yeah, maybe the format of end of year letter.
That's right. Yeah.
And we're going kind of beyond storytelling, and we're telling the story a different way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, this has been proven, obviously, because as I started to say, Pixar is very successful. So I would encourage you to try and use that structure to tell that bigger story and your impact.
So how many of you get those cold calls, those sales cold calls, and get super irritated when you're super busy running around all day, and you just don't want to take this call. You're like, really? Why are you calling me right now? You've gotten those. They're scripted. Somehow they maybe have your name, but that's as much of the customization as this call typically gets. And this kind of ditch the elevator pitch or the sales scripted phone call. We found that 59% of folks that get these calls get irritated with this generic sales pitch. And it makes complete sense. I'm sure, I think it was all of you, maybe every once in a while. I think it might even be more than 59%. So just something to remember around ditching this kind of common elevator pitch is 87% of the folks that do get the call are more encouraged to either place an order or to do business with whoever is calling if the caller could really identify what the needs are, not only the business needs of why they're calling, but how that's going to be a solution for you. And ultimately, that just goes back to relationship building. I think they are getting better at this kind of cold call, sales cold call pitch. But please remember that too, when we're making calls to donors, and when we're talking to prospective donors or folks at foundations and corporations, we really want to make sure that it's not a generic pitch, it doesn't feel scripted, and then it feels specific and kind of tailored to the person.
Yeah, so, having your pitch tailored to the person requires, obviously some improvisation skills from you. But, with all the preparation and the practice, you'll get there. Another exercise we wanted to share with you today that you can do, obviously, after we're done with the webinar is, go around and recruit 10 people. It could be your coworkers, your family, friends, whoever, whoever you know. And then ask them which 3 words come to mind in response to one of these questions on the screen. So what is my organization about? What is my cause about? What am I about? And look for patterns. Look for recurring words that are coming that might help you find your one-word pitch, for example. And look for also things that, are not really in line with what you think you're saying and what you're conveying. And that's a great opportunity also to refine, all your pitches. And I'm going to use plural now because it's not just one pitch that you're going to have in your arsenal. It's going to be multiple. And see how you can correct it, right? So, you might find out that people actually think you're doing something completely different than what it is that your organization is about. So how do you then, recraft your pitches so that the message you're giving is, in line with what it is that you want to say? And you will find that people will be very happy to share that information with you. We had a participant at the Fundraising Academy that tested actually with 50 people. And then they've used that information all types of different ways now. They're even using it in some of the scripted presentation that they have. So they have this consistent message that is now very much in line with what they want to convey.
Yeah, and I think this is a great activity to also bring to your board and your volunteer leaders, because you want them involved in fundraising as well. So any activity that you can get for them to help practice. And I think that that's the key here, right? Practice, practice, practice. Improv and sharing your story and engaging and persuading donors and also attracting them is an art form just as much as anything else. And we need to practice it. So that activity is great. And I also say, use any opportunity to practice on your board, your volunteers, top donors of yours. Go back to your top donors and say, we want to continue to leverage your donation to bring in more people. That's a great pitch in itself, because every donor wants their dollars leveraged. Can I practice on you so that I feel more prepared in the future? Your colleagues, other folks in your organization that might not be doing fundraising should want to be included as well. And it's a great opportunity to bring them aside, get them engaged, and get honest feedback. Coworkers, and obviously friends and family. There's just so many ways to practice these days. The holidays are coming up, so you're going to be at holiday parties with folks outside of your organization. Use every chance you get to practice feeling on your feet and comfortable telling a different story that might really fit a different person's interest in your organization.
Yeah, because the more you do that, then the more you'll be able to pivot and improvise and feel comfortable on how you talk about yourself, how you talk about the work you do, and how you talk about your cause and organization. So we can't emphasize enough. That's why if we could write it even more on that screen, we'll say practice, 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 practice.
And really bringing it all together, we just want to remind you that, you know, knowing the purpose of your presentation is an important part, and ultimately the meeting is an important part of doing just that, persuading your donors, getting them more engaged, and having them be champions of your cause. So being clear, not just with yourself, but others that are involved in your organization, your committees and your volunteers, your CEOs, all the people that are involved, what the purpose of these meetings and each presentation is, and defining those objectives and goals as a team together. We call them in consulting road mapping meetings. So we don't really go into any meeting without having a pretty big conversation and involving a lot of folks that might have relationships with the donor, so that we know, is this the time to ask, or do we need to do more discovery? Using that planning sheet is something that we recommend, and please build upon it as it works for your organization, and customize it for your organization with specific things that are important for you to leave behind or to know about your donors. Prepare and practice, and practice and practice and practice, and find times to practice and feel comfortable with that improvisation. That yes, there are pieces of your pitch that you're going to be putting together, but ultimately one-on-one or out in the community and building awareness for your organization, it's improv. It's being on your feet and developing real relationships. And then don't forget to conclude with a call to action in your meetings, in your communications. That's what your donors and current and future donors are looking for you to do, to help steer them on what are the priorities that you need most help with. That's really what they're looking for you to communicate.
Yeah. So, you know, we hope I think we answered most of your questions.
Good.
Yeah. There are a couple that came in that I would like to just talk about for a minute or two. We only have two left. So it was Didi Ramirez who was asking, what are the most important you know, points to start with when engaging with potential clients, and saying that there are some chatty people that tend to overwhelm prospects. And I think we talked a little bit, actually a lot about that, you know, about listening, but also, you know, really asking questions, right? Wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And depending on if those people have to be in the room, prepping and practicing with them, there always can be more prep and practice. Even if it means that, you know, a donor or another, you know, colleague needs to get on the phone and have a phone call if you can't meet in person. But prepping and practicing your team, and then ultimately, if you're the either CEO or director of development that's in charge of moving this, you know, fundraising and this donor forward, choosing the ones that are the best stewards of what you're trying to accomplish. I was just at a meeting this week, and there's an amazing donor, an amazing board member that has so much heart, but she's having a little bit of trouble getting the real, you know, distilled down pitch and point of the campaign. And so she needs more coaching before she can sit in front of a major donor. So that's just something to know, that not everyone is the right person to be in the room too, if you're feeling like they're kind of taking over and not letting someone else speak.
Yeah.
And that might be your CEO.
You never know. So we are actually already out of time. Just wanted to make sure that you all know we're going to send you the recording and the slides. So, you know, you can review it. And we hope it was, you know, everything that you were hoping for. We had a great time with you guys. Thank you for your participation. And we look forward to seeing you again. Our next webinar is on December 6th. And that's going to be on stewardship, because although I know we're all fighting for, you know, year-end giving, you know, we have to make sure that we also you know, don't forget those donors that are already, you know, with our organization. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.